In the 1930s, during one of the worst economic recessions in human history, a group of a couple hundred people got together. They moved 51,000 tons of steel and concrete into the middle of the most densely populated city on planet Earth, New York City. And in 410 days, they built the entire Empire State Building from start to finish. If you try and do the exact same thing today in Toronto, Ontario, you develop and construct something for 410 days straight, you will get 2 dwelling units. This is amazing. I love societal progress. If you're anything like me, you grew up in suburban Ontario. And if you're anything like me, you only realized how good life could get until you got outside of it. Every single time I flew back home from Boston or New York or San Francisco, I found myself wanting. I wanted my friends to live in a 100-meter radius of me. I wanted to go get groceries from the corner store every single day. But more importantly, in the midst of the worst housing crisis I had ever experienced, it felt like the only thing we were building was more of this, single-family houses over and over and over again. And every single time I thought about this, I developed an unhealthy addiction to understanding how urbanism works. And a couple years ago, I decided to go on a little bit of an adventure to try and seek answers to the question that I'd always had. When did we forget how to build stuff? Our journey today begins in 2023, during my senior year of high school. I knew nothing about development from the start of this. I come from the land of software and technology. Frankly, I had no business doing any of it. But like most things, the best way to learn anything is just to LARP. Over the next few months, I contacted a bunch of urban planners. I told them that I'd shadowed them for a bit, and I tried to learn everything that there possibly was to know about how development worked behind the scenes. And I wanted to figure out if there was a process I could point to and say, this is stupid, this doesn't deserve to exist. And eventually, I thought I did. If you're a developer, you obviously live in a society, and the first thing you need to do is figure out what rules and regulations actually apply to the thing you're trying to build. So you'll reach out to City Hall, they're gonna get back to you with a couple dozen policies. This would not be a problem if it weren't for the fact that these policies were hundreds and hundreds of pages long. And so you're going to spend weeks dealing with all of these. You're going to hire tens of thousands of dollars worth of lawyers and planners. And eventually you're going to realize that it's actually not legally possible to build what you want. I thought this was really freaking stupid. And I saw it happen hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times over the next couple of years. And I also figured that this was the root cause of a lot of our issues. If we were spending so much time trying to figure out if things were possible, that's time that we could have spent doing construction. And if the odds of development are so incredibly low to begin with, we need as many shots on goal as possible to be able to speed this up. And I figured this was a pretty good place for me to start. I decided that I could potentially try and build a couple tools to solve this. So I raised a little bit of funding, I decided to take a gap year, and away we went to the races. A couple months later, I had my first idea. If I took every single piece of policy that applied to development across Ontario, I stuck them all into a database, and I built an LLM around it, it would be super easy. Like, this entire thing would have been solved, right? Like, we could just avoid talking to planners altogether. This was not as easy as it seemed. Most of these plans and policies are not available to the general public, and when they are, they're split across thousands of different government websites. But after a couple months of work, I did it, and I built up a massive set of infrastructure to deal with it on its own. For some more context, this is what planning work normally looks like. You'll look at a couple hundred regulations, you'll try and figure out answers to if something is possible, the architectural details behind it, and this is what Arterial looked like in the first ever version of it. You could automate that entire part of the process, and instead of spending weeks and talking to a bunch of planners and trying to get all these answers, you get the exact same thing on one website that was actually legally citable in a matter of seconds. I thought this was freaking huge. Like, the stupidest part of everything that I learned over the past few months was so easily automatable. I thought this was a massive, massive goal. And after reaching out to a couple hundred people, everybody that I'd already spoken to, getting a bunch of initial interest, this is what happened. Nobody used it, and nobody liked it. Needless to say, this was kind of heartbreaking. I had poured so many months into something that I thought was the root cause of the issue that I cared the most about. And after being heartbreaking for so long, people started to reach back out, right as I was about to give up. This time, it was about something that I had initially completely written off. Turns out I am not the only one that thinks that the way that we deal with government is stupid. Developers rebel against the rules every single day. They will study for years, if not decades, the buildings that go wrong or that go on around the places where they want to build. And turns out, if you can argue to City Hall that, hey, you built something over here, so my thing deserves to get built, it will get built. And as it turns out, development is not an exact science. It's more of an art. And it actually depends on both of these things, being able to defend the new with justification and being able to guard the old with policy. And I figured that I could probably take a crack at building something like this. So I took tens of thousands of applications that have been submitted in the city of Toronto for the past 20 years. I took every single argument and policy and clause that was referenced inside of them to try and figure out if I could build something with it. And build something, I did. For the first time, in the next version of Arterial, you could take anything that you possibly wanted to build anywhere in Toronto, and you could find precedent for it. You could find arguments that you could deliver directly to City Hall and be like, hey, you've done this over and over and over again, no matter how crazy it is, and I want to build the exact same thing. Then I realized, if we have data on everything that possibly limits development, we can just simulate City Hall to begin with. And so in the next version of Arterial, we combined all of this, and we took a look at simulating what potential buildings would look like that aren't written in law, but the maximum extent of them. And we put them into a bunch of 3D models all the way down to the units and layout of them. And suddenly, before I knew it, the thing that normally took people several months to realize took under 10 seconds. And soon, it wasn't just me saying this. It looked like this was the thing that people actually needed. What started off as kind of a drip of interest turned into a massive barrage. I had to host community dinners and events and build up a massive WhatsApp group. And there was more stuff that I needed to do that I couldn't deal with. And for the first time, I felt like I was doing something that people actually needed and wanted. And that brings us to today. Arterial has grown quite a bit in size and in scope. We have worked with dozens of firms who use us pretty much every single day, and we have helped simulate thousands of housing projects across Ontario, all the way from massive high-rises that are trying to get permitted in the middle of industrial districts next to friggin' factories, all the way down to independent developers that are just trying to figure out if it's possible to build Garden Suite in their backyard. Arterial started off at a Socratica session almost 2 years ago today. And for its entire existence, I have been the only one working on it. But I say we a lot in this presentation because it took hundreds of people making incredibly calculated bets on the ideas that I wanted to put forth, and me as a person, all the way from our initial investors, all the way to the hundreds of planners that somehow decided that letting an unlicensed 17-year-old go completely wild with unregistered business information was a good idea. And today, it has grown so much far beyond me. And the happiest part is that a few years into this, I think I finally have an answer to the question that started it all. When did we stop building? And the real answer that I have is that we kind of never did. There are hundreds of thousands of people that have dedicated their entire lives to building the world around you. If you go outside this arena today and you look at the horizon, every single square inch that you will have seen has been touched by a human at some point. This is unprecedented in human civilization. The real issue is that as our cities have gone from tens to hundreds to thousands to millions of people, there are so many plans and regulations and policies and processes in this place that it is impossible for these people, the hundreds of thousands of people, to even start to think about the ways that cities need to function. And my hope is that with tools like Arterial, we can enable these people to get back to doing what they love most, which is building the cities that we call home. Arterial has been the greatest journey of my life so far. Thank you so much, Symposium. We are only just getting started.